Well, to discuss this, I'm joined now from Boston by Bolsonaro supporter Julio Moraes. He's the founder of the NGO, the Public Administration Institute. In New York, we have Bolsonaro critic Miriam Marques. She's the co-founder of Defend Democracy in Brazil. And completing our panel from Washington is Elcio Santana. He's a senior associate at the Center for Strategic Studies. I thank you all for joining us. Miriam, let me begin with you. How do you feel about Bolsonaro being your president?
I feel, of course I feel sad as someone who, I'm an activist for democracy in Brazil. I feel sad, but at the same time I feel strong. I feel sad for the Brazilian people because what will coming, what we expected from now, I think it's a very dark times for Brazilian democracy and for Brazilian people, especially the vulnerable people, the indigenous, the poor, the minorities, LGBT people, women, poor people who live in the slums, in the favelas, and in the countryside of Brazil. I am sad, but at the same time, I'm courageous because, we will resist that.
So tell me, Miriam, if this is such a dark time for Brazil, why did 55% of Brazilians vote for him in that runoff?
That's a good question. We are not talking about free elections in a way. When we talk about Brazil, we didn't have yesterday free, democratic, no problematic at all elections. Everybody knows, and your television channel is reporting a lot about Brazil recently. Since the coup d'etat in 2016, and then through all that happened on the way, we are talking about elections that, for instance, we had the imprisonment of Lula da Silva that was the front runner before for no reason with no proof. We're also talking about a fraudulent election that we know, for instance, in many ways, especially everybody saw in the last period, the invasion of people's identities on Facebook, and then multi-million dollars campaign on WhatsApp, where fake news, the most horrendous, the most terrible fake news about our candidate, Fernando Haddad, inundated people's cell phones in Brazil. We are talking also about, evangelical support on all over in Brazil, channels, radios, television. So it was not at all fair elections in Brazil.
And that's an argument we've heard from the other side quite often over the past few months. Those who would have voted for Lula if he was allowed to run, and then who voted for Haddad, but they lost. Julio, your candidate won. For many others, they see the president as a bigoted, narrow-minded populist who's taking Brazil down a dark path. Tell me why you see it differently.
I see different. Well, thanks for having me here. I see different. The majority of the people went to the poll and spoke the voice. They choose Bolsonaro as a new president. Bolsonaro bring hope, bring a new change in Brazilian history. Right now, I see people on the street. There was people's campaign. People went out. People invest their time so they make sure we bring a change to Brazil. So right now, we expect Bolsonaro to do a good administration. He's going to be the president for all Brazilians, not only for the people that vote for him, the 55% of the people, but the entire Brazilian population.
Elcio Santana, when we look at the trajectory politically in Brazil, there were 4 successive victories for the left, whether through Lula or Dilma, and suddenly everything imploded for them. Was this less about a Bolsonaro victory on the right and more about a leftist implosion and a leftist loss?
I think neither one. I think I just finished an article that will be published next week, and in which I say that the title is "What You See Is Not What You Get." So you see a presidential election, and what you get is actually the change of the Constitution in 1988 that sort of sealed the social pact, the Brazilian society after 21 years of military dictatorship. Since then, the country has moved to a more conservative mood, judging by the people that have been elected. So Bolsonaro is not a black swan in the sense that Taleb calls a low probability event. I mean, Bolsonaro is in the making for quite a long time, and if it was not Bolsonaro, there will be another right-wing candidate who would gather some votes. Bolsonaro is an accident as an individual, but as a trend, there was a conservative movement in Brazilian society toward the right, if you want.
Okay, that's interesting.
So,
Miriam,
it's
interesting. If you'd allow me, let me just ask Miriam how she feels about that. That's been the trend, that Brazil, the Brazilian populace is going more and more conservative. And it was a perfect storm. You have corruption scandals. Yes, you might call it a coup against Dilma, but for many people, Operation Car Wash and everything else meant that they were fed up with the current politicians and they wanted somebody different. They chose somebody with what they call traditional values. That happened to be Bolsonaro. Address that for me.
First of all, I want to say that it's not, I agree there is a trend, a global trend to the right, let's say, but also there is a global trend on manipulation on elections for the extreme right with Steve Bannon and his company, right, backing from starting Texas and then the United States, and then now he's in the United States. He did a kind of a test on Brazil of his methods, right? Okay, but I want to disagree a little bit with, oh, there is a tendency to the right. Let's remember that the Workers' Party, Fernando Haddad, got 31 million votes in Brazil. I'm talking about 31, when we talk about the votes to the left in Brazil, to Fernando Haddad, we are talking about a very qualified votes. We are talking about, at least, I would say, at least half or more of that are activists, are people in associations, are people in unions, in all kinds of civil society organizations. So yes, there is this trend in Brazil because let's remember, we don't live in a kind of a democracy in Brazil. Let's talk about the media in Brazil, right? We have only one channel, Global Television, that is in all houses, all record televisions. They are talking against the Workers' Party, against the left, every single minute you call on them,
okay.
All right? We are talking also about you say about car wash, let's say the truth. Car wash is a kind of, at least, controversial operation because a lot of politicians that were much more involved with much more proof against them, they never touch about by the car wash operation.
Okay, so putting all of that aside, Julio, why should the world respect or the world look for encouraging signs from someone who admired a military dictatorship and admired Pinochet? Tell me why.
Because that's democracy. That's what people spoke for. That's why we have election, all right? Just to go towards Marianne said, I disagree with her because for the Works Party and its associated or allied, the only democracy is the democracy they support. If they don't get elected, that's not a democracy. They support Maduro in Venezuela, and they call it democracy, and they call Bolsonaro a dictator without the guy even taking office yet. You know what I'm saying? So there's like controversial what Marianne said in the Works Party defend too. They defend the dictatorship in other countries, but in our country, when we have democracy and they lose, then we become a dictator and our elections become fraud.
Miriam?
Well, he says not a dictatorship. We don't need to put words in Bolsonaro's mouth. He himself says about that. He said very clear a few days before the elections that he will stop this crying of the black people, of this and that. He said his vice president is a general. There was threats by high people in the arms saying that now is the end of the Reds, that let's go. He himself, in his word, he invite people to go after every single red person in Brazil, minorities, homosexuals. Yes, I'm very afraid about democracy in Brazil. I will be not surprised if Bolsonaro acts soon will be like ending the closing the Congress. He will go after the judiciary. I won't be surprised if very, very bad things to our democracy will happen.
Right, and those comments about black people specifically, he said, what historic debt do we have with blacks? I never enslaved them. The Portuguese never set foot in Africa. The blacks were delivered by blacks. That was on July 30th, 2018. Elcio,
Exactly.
as we look at what he has on the menu in terms of leading, there's talk of the Amazon and the environment, social issues, economic issues, crime and security and so forth. What's his top priority, do you think?
Well, that's where the big problems are. I mean, let me just go back a step here and says that if the candidate against Bolsonaro would have been Ciro Gomes or Alckmin or any other, Bolsonaro would have lost. Bolsonaro won because part of the voters didn't want to have the PT. And we can discuss why, is that correct, is not correct, but the fact is, part of the people that voted in Bolsonaro did not vote in Bolsonaro, voted not to have the PT again. And that's controversial, we can debate that, but if it had been Ciro or Alckmin, so I'm sort of nuanced the trend that I have pointed out before, but let me just mention the question that you had asked. I mean, Bolsonaro didn't have, he had a lot of proposals, but the proposals were basically inconsistent. He ran on some outrageous, in my point of view, declaration that captured the imagination of some people.
It's fascinating times for Brazil and all of Latin America. I thank you very much for joining us here on the Newsmakers.